Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is my new Coleman mini bike. This is going to be the first of few upgrade-like modifications that I'm going to perform on this mini bike. It's really the second if you count pulling out this throttle limiter screw. I had explained before that where this mini bike is on a torque converter, it really doesn't behoove you to have this, since you need about 3/4 throttle to get things rolling in the first place. So you still want something after that. What I haven't touched is the screw right back here that limits the rest of the throttle linkage. I'm going to pull the cover off the air box and get the air filter out of the way. Probably let this dangle from the vent line. Maybe I'll disconnect it. We'll have to see how that goes. But once those are off, we should be able to see what's cooking. Alright. Safe to say that didn't go according to plan. You really can't get this cover off without this side going up. You can't go up because you're limited by that hose. I'll use a pair of needle nose and I'm going to get this end off, and I can take the whole thing. Bruh. Even with all of that removed, I think I have to, yeah. Okay. It's off of there. Another wing nut. Come on, sausage fingers. Don't feel me now. I don't want to drop this because it could make its way down behind that fan shroud, and then we'd have to take that all apart. Just a regular filter. This is just a vent line for the gas tank. It's not meant to have overflow. You're only supposed to fill to the bottom of the bread basket there. Any excess would find its way out through that vent. That goes into your air box and your carburetor. If it's just the vapor, because you didn't overfill it, you shouldn't have any problems. It could create a vacuum if this was loaded with fluid, though. Alright. You can either take this whole piece off with these two 10mm nuts, or there's two screws. They're Phillips. You use a stubby screwdriver. I'll loosen those and I should be able to remove this top portion and then get to the linkage that way. You see what I mean, kid? We're in like Flynn. Let's take this, get it out of the way. I'll clean everything off before I reinstall it. There you go. Here's the screw that I'm now going to remove. It's a Phillips, just like these two little guys over here. and it doesn't appear to be tack welded, so I don't expect much resistance. Technically, the complete removal of this screw completes the full throttle modification. Twisting the Hornet release, and it's going much further than it would if it had the screw limiting against that stopper. That's good enough for most. Now I'm going to improve the feel of the throttle. I'm going to do that with a tuck and run linkage. This is also considered a quick link linkage. This is for GX200, Predator 224. Pretty sure it works with the 212s. Anything that has a governor. What it does is it's going to add another pivot point, and it's going to utilize a rod much like this throttle rod down here, so that you have a rigid component connecting that throttle to this linkage. So I guess you have two linkages, but they work in unison, and as one it's better than the other. Here's the issue. The clevis for this throttle cable from the factory is on the throttle arm here. There's a hole over there. That is where most of your engines have it when they're set up, you know, out of the box from Harbor Freight or something. They're made that way because that's the way they work in the power equipment they're used on. But that can be moved. I'm going to have to remove this arm. I'm going to back the screw out of the clevis. I'll pull the cable out. We're going to be modifying that. Maybe just rerouting it. We'll see what works. But I'm going to need this portion of the linkage. We have a nut up here. Take that. And this little thing on top. Take that too. I'm keeping everything in order as I take it off with this throttle arm flipped over. Alright. You'll find another spring. That goes back to your governor. That's going to be going right back exactly where it is once we're done moving the clevis. That's the bottom side. It's a C-clip. There it is from the top side. I'll use a flathead screwdriver to remove that, and I'll reinstall it in that hole. I guess you could do it connected to the spring, but you know what I'm saying? It's that easy. I use that little flat screwdriver to remove my clip. I put it in position, and then I reinstall it with my needle nose. I moved it from the throttle arm back to the only other hole that it can fit in. I'm now going to install this back on there with everything except for that spring connected. I'm going to leave that one off for now. I will be connecting the one that goes back to the governor though. Goes underneath, attaches to that only lobe hanging down with a hole. It's kind of hard to screw this up. With this throttle lever in place, I'm checking down below to make sure that there's nothing interfering with my governor spring. I have a nice clear shot. That checks out. I then removed the rest of that small spring that was hanging there. That's the factory return spring. That little sucker is under a lot of tension. That thing is what makes turning your throttle so difficult when you have a governor. The linkage that we're going to be using has its own return spring. The next thing I'm going to do is swap out this spring washer for a plastic, might be vinyl washer. This one is out of another linkage I had. I have a couple spares sitting up on the bench from the factory. You typically find those underneath. This one has a metal washer, a plastic washer, then a metal washer. I'm leaving those there. Took a plastic washer from another unit. That goes on. You can see how it fits over that base, but it doesn't interfere with the threads. After that, we have this funny looking thing. And then the nut. What this does is takes the slop. Let's use the ratchet for the rest. It's a lock nut. It takes the slop out of this. If you try to compress this spring washer, you can't get this cap piece down far enough to get the slop out and not have too much tension on this arm. So, very easy modification, but it makes a good bit of difference. I just removed these three 10mm bolts from my recoil starter. We're going to be replacing those with 3 bolts that came with this linkage. I'm adding a washer to the situation. That washer is going to go with the bolt down here on the bottom. These two will just pass through the linkage, and then the recoil, and finally the threaded portion of the fan shroud. This linkage is used. It was on my Predator 224, so it wasn't on there very long. I'll grab that after. This portion comes in a few pieces. It's just a pressure fitting that works as a cable stop, the small L bracket, and then a bolt and a nylock nut. That's how it goes when you put it together. This is getting installed just like so. I'm going to put my bolt with my washer in first down here, and I'm going to snug it up. Then I'll put these two in. That way I don't have to worry about holding the recoil while I have all of this jazz in my hand. Both of these top bolts are barely threaded in. I'm just flopping in the breeze. This is going to help us in installing this rod. It has a bent end and it has a straight end. The end with the bend goes to the pivot. The straight end is going to go into our stop or clevis, whatever you want to call it. Alright, I'm going to push back on the pivot. I'm going to line up the rod and I'm going to send it through just like so. When we tighten that screw, it's really hard to get you in focus because it's so shiny. That's going to clamp onto the rod, allowing this pivot to control this linkage back here. Before we tighten that screw, we want to bring our pivot around so that we have a straight shot from our cable stop to our clevis here. I want to make sure that I still have a little bit of something coming down the end there. Alright, I'm going to hold this with one hand and then I'll end up tightening that with the other. Yeah, buddy. Looks like we got ourselves a full snapper. That'll work. Take a look down at the carburetor. You can see the butterfly moving a little bit. The governor's doing its thing. Now we have to add the cable. I'm pulling back the stock one. It's rather long. We only have to make it from this housing down to the front of the engine. I'm going to pull this whole unit apart and I'll get the cable out. Well, that's unique and not the most helpful way. I got the gripper off, so I'm not connected, but the little guide piece that helps the cable make that sweep seems to be pressed in there somehow. I tried getting at it with a screwdriver and I'm just going to end up breaking it. I'm not sure if mine's deformed or if it's supposed to be like that, maybe tamper resistant, but I'm going to leave it and try to work it without removing it. What I want to do is shorten the length of this cable. I accidentally pulled a little bit of it through and now it doesn't want to go back out the other end because it had that little fray, so it's catching on the inside conduit. Right now I know I have about 6 inches pulled back. There's that much hanging out the end, so I'm probably like 5 inches back into that black tube. I only need to get from there to there. I'm going to try to hold this in place, figure out my length, and then I'm going to be cutting the whole thing short. The key is to, well, I'm going to have to make a clean cut 5 inches back so that I can move this cable, right? Because what I want to do is pull this cable back and have more cable and less conduit. It'll make sense when I get there. Right now I'm just going to hack off 5 or 6 inches so I can get a clean end, hopefully, and I'll try to work it from there. I have a couple extra inches of cable coming out of the housing, I just set it down alongside some other wires and such. Comes back in here and then down. I'm going to keep it inside the frame. This is where the cable was looped before. They went underneath somehow and then back up around the rear. We just need about that much. Put this back up. Make sure nothing's too tight here. When you turn the handlebars, you don't want it to pull out. Push this back. Make sure we have a gentle swoop. Nothing is binding up. All right. So here's where my thumb is, and I'll add up to that end of this. It's like a sheath that goes over the conduit. That's where I'm going to make my cut. At this point, I'm going to pull the cable back through. All right, it disappears, and I want to be beyond the point that I'm going to cut. That way, when I cut this, I'll have all of that extra cable coming out the end. We'll cut it shorter once we're done sending it through our clevis and tightening everything down. That should be pretty close. I'll snip this off and then send the cable back through. When you cut the end of these conduits, they have a tendency to crimp a little bit. It's a metal sleeve inside a rubber one. I just used a pick to open up the hole. You can see the cable over on this side. I'm going to push it through the housing, and voila. Now it's coming out the other end. It's still coming out. Alright, I have plenty for my throttle, and we definitely have more than enough to send through our little clevis over here. Up at the handlebars, I have my adjuster all the way in. Down here, I'm coming through the cable stop. I'm going to pull this end nice and taut, and then I'm going to tighten the set screw with my other hand. It's just that little tiny wrench. Beautiful. Now we have a full and smooth throttle. This is a big improvement over stock. I'm going to tighten this screw one more time just to make sure, and then get my air box back on. Don't go over tightening these screws. You're only threaded into plastic. You just have to be snug and then just a little bit past. Everything should seat up flush and seal tight. Speaking of seals, you have a gasket that goes underneath your filter. There goes my stubby Phillips. You want to make sure that that's there before you get your filter on. I'm trying to line it up with a stud, but I can't really see it. There it is. And then the first wing nut. After that, I just have to add the cover, the other wing nut, and then hook up my vent line for the fuel tank. Sorry for a little up close and personal for this shot. Try to stay off to the side. Turn the fuel on. A little bit of choke. Check the kill switch. Idle. Turn idle. Still gotta fix that kickstand. Throttle works though. Just from that startup, I can already tell I need an adjustment. I can take this throttle lever a little bit more this way. I reached in behind the airbox with the screwdriver. Here I am. Okay, I can get to the screw right down here on our clevis, stop, what have you. I loosened it so that now when I move the throttle lever, it glides along the rod. Okay, we're going to clock this throttle lever forward slightly. I'm not engaging the governor spring in the back. Right about there I am. You see the one in the front move? Right there. So I'm going to break the difference. We go right in the middle. Hopefully that won't affect idle. I really don't think it will. And this will give us a longer throw. That way we can ensure that we're hitting that full throttle. Way more responsive. Let's see if I can make an adjustment to the idle. I'm not engaging or anything, but it should be able to come down. That didn't work. I pushed the lever slightly forward. Comes down. So I just have to back that off ever so slightly on the adjustment back here on the airbox. Alright, that definitely brought it down. Still not bottomed out. The lever on the mechanism. Try to turn that engine to it now. Yeah, that's just about it. Only one way to find out. It's like 38 degrees out, so I'll let the bike warm up for 2 minutes. Throttle's a watch turn. Notice that right off the bat. You guys can see. Expecting that. Still hitting some sort of governor up there. Look at that, we're coming right down to a nice slow idle. But it's still accelerating at the end of the straightaway. It's just picking up there. That's just right along. Out in the open. Like 38. This still doesn't have some light. I'd like to pull this brake for that. Yeah, like halfway across the field it picks up again. Engagement seems a little smoother. That's because we're going past the RPM that's required. It doesn't hesitate as much. More backfire. I can feel the governor kicking in. Right there. What that noise is. Oh, this is a terrible idea. Yeah, keep tread. Come over there on the left side. I mean, I put my feet up, but I wasn't trying to touch the ground. I was just trying to stay out of the mud. So the extra RPM does help. Out of gas. Whoops. I just propped her up against a tree, topped her off with fuel. The gas is still turned on. A little choke. Confident that's all it was. It's getting sunnier, but it actually feels like it's getting colder too. Definitely gonna upgrade the V-tread. Dig in, they'll get you up. Still working a little bit. Put your knee on the seat. Whoop. I think I finally threw the chain. So that's that. That's what testing's all about. I got the bike hosed off for the most part. That was starting to freeze up on me, so I just kind of went for the heavy. I haven't looked at the chain to see where exactly I'm off, if it's just the rear or the front, but I think it's both, because I was able to wheel this out of the woods no problem. It could be on the front, but it's just not wrapped around the axle in the back. That's a possibility too. I'm going to take this little cover off, just because I haven't yet, and we'll see what's back there. At the same time, we get the chain back on. Probably going to have to loosen the axle and the adjusters. I had about a fat inch of free play before I did this. I should have tightened it, but there's only one way to figure out what it's going to do, right? Yep, we're still on in the front. That was pretty convenient, to tell you the truth. Usually if it's on one of the sprockets and it comes off the other, it wraps around either the axle or the shaft, and you end up with a locked rear wheel. It would have been freewheeling with the pulley, but only if the back wheel was rotating. If you understand that, good for you. This is a pretty good setup. Well, this is loose. I guess we can pull it off. Maybe. It's kind of close to the fan shroud. Alright. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Is that 9? 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at that. That's a 9-2 sprocket. I'm actually recounting just in case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Isn't that something? I would have figured it'd be like a 1050. I wonder what the rear is. Doesn't have a sprocket on the other side, it just has the pulley. I'm gonna need two hands to get that back on the front. And I'll see if I can get it on the rear. I don't know if it was that stretched or loose yet. It was definitely stretched though. That's for certain. Coleman actually did a pretty good job with these chain guards. These feel like some sort of an ABS plastic. A little bit flexible. They also have some density to them. They look to be the same color black all throughout. This front one's the same way. Just feels like there's something there. I also like how they used 8mm bolts for everything, including the bracket, the removable bracket that holds the front guard on. All of the holes are threaded, so you don't need any nuts. Nice mounts back here on the swing arm. Welded on, both threaded. The two short bolts go to the rear chain guard and the three longer ones in the front. Very, very simple. I ended up counting the teeth on the rear sprocket, and it is 50. So we're running a 950. I tried feeding the chain back on. If I get all of the slack along the bottom, you can see how far down it comes. If we were on those teeth, this chain would be like probably about that loose. It didn't come off in the front, that's a fact. It did come off in the rear, and I think it was down here. That mud also has some roots in it. When I put my knee on it, that chain being loose, giving it the extra hornet release, compressing the suspension, everything. I think it was just the perfect blend of events for this chain to derail the way it did. I beat on it before, I did all kinds of donuts and things, and it didn't blow off then, so I'm gonna call this one sort of my fault because it was a little loose, and then just the nature of the beast. I'm gonna loosen up the axle, move the adjusters forward, get the chain back on, set my tension where it should be, probably about a 1/2 inch of free play, and then I'll put my guards back on. I have the chain back on, the axle's tight, the adjusters are set. Probably have about a healthy 3/4 of free play. I definitely had more than that when I started today. It's completely my fault. If we sit back and look at this, look at the path of that chain. It's pretty close to level along the top. When my considerable bulk is on the seat, it compresses here. The swing arm comes up. It'll be even more level. The other thing that comes up is the axle point in relation to that jack shaft. Right now, we're like this. It's going to come up like that. They placed the pivot for the swing arm just about dead parallel to the jack shaft. They're limiting the travel with these shorter shocks. If you leave this thing alone, it should hold on to chains pretty well. This thing can do a whole lot better than it did today. Now that my engine has a few hours of runtime under a load, it's ready for its first oil change since the break-in cycle. This is also going to be a good time to do a head swap and ramp up the compression a little bit. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.
I want you to stay. I want you to stay.